I've said many times on my channel that I am a huge fan of Shopify's stock, but with it trading over $1,400 a share, that is a tough company to get a lot of exposure with, so I know I wanted to start exploring other options. Now, the company we'll be taking a look at today has a very similar business operation, but price per share is much lower than what we see for Shopify, and that company is Wix. So let's play the intro so we can start talking about Wix. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Matt, and before we get started here, I just need to say, not advice, I'm gonna take this as advice. If you need advice, speak to a financial advisor, but this is just for your entertainment purposes only. Also remember, if you like this video, it's a 5-cent donation for charity, and if you haven't subscribed already, that is another 10-cent donation. So if you like it, just know that you will be having a charitable donation through that process. So if you're not familiar with Wix, they've actually been around since 2000, and they are one of those online platforms that allows for you to build a website without having the knowledge of coding. So it's very much drag and drop, click, play, whatever, to build a website very simply, but also has very beautiful, or so they describe as elegant designs to separate yourself from more of the template platform-based website builders. What really catches my interest about this company is the recent adoption of having a more e-commerce platform to compete with companies like Shopify and Squarespace, as well as adding the App Store, which allows for you to have enhanced features to make your website run more like a business. This would be things like Google Ads and MailChimp can be easily integrated to your Wix website. And also, just for sake of full disclosure, part of the reason why I am talking about Wix this week is because I actually am using their platform to build a website for the real estate business that I'm working on. But with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and run through the numbers here for Wix. Now, I'm sure this comes as no surprise that I'm going to be comparing it to Shopify this week because they are pretty much a direct competitor with each other. I think Shopify does have a little bit more of an emphasis when it comes to the e-commerce platform itself, but they both still are a place where you can go and build your own website. And admittedly, I also wish that companies like Squarespace or WordPress were publicly traded companies, but since they're not, we don't have the data to make that comparison as well. Just looking at this though from a market cap perspective, we can clearly see that Wix is a much smaller business than Shopify. I think that can be expected though, because Shopify is a little bit better known of a company these days than Wix is, and has a little bit more robust of a platform when it comes to building an e-commerce or online business. Neither one of these companies though impressed me very much with their enterprise value to sales ratio. As we can see, Wix is still significantly lower than Shopify, but that being said, it's still pretty high if we're using that comparison of staying in that 2 to 5% range. 16.38, again, that's still pretty high, but nothing compared to the 71.59 for Shopify. Also, I didn't do the PE ratio because while Shopify does have a PE ratio since they have earnings, Wix does not. So I just didn't feel that'd be a fair comparison to include that, given that only one of them actually has a PE ratio. I was also slightly surprised that both of these have a relatively volatile beta, 1.35 and 1.56. I was even more surprised though that Wix was less volatile than Shopify. Now, part of that could be due to the fact that Shopify is growing very rapidly as a business, relatively speaking, towards Wix, so that could come with a little bit more volatility associated with it. But these companies both still have a relatively high beta and offer a little bit of volatility with the market. The revenue growth was also a little bit of a letdown here for Wix. 26.38% for a company that's been in business for 21 years and isn't profitable comes up a little bit short of where my expectations were, especially when we take a look at Shopify at 73.4%. And Shopify was started only 6 years, give or take, after Wix. So it's not like Wix has been around to get a significant head start, yet Shopify is doing much better when it comes to growth in both revenue and users, as well as the platform itself. But this was a very pleasant surprise for me to see because this EBITDA growth here for Wix is incredible, 177.79%. compared to Shopify, who's at negative 174.95%. But the quick ratio here is where Shopify always stands out to me because 17.03% for a quick ratio is absolutely crazy, especially for a company like Shopify. Now, Wix isn't bad. 1.72 is still in that range where a lender can feel confident lending them money should they need it to raise money through debt. But when you have that number next to 17.03, it's just such a small drop in the bucket that I don't want to say it's meaningless, but it's hard to get excited over that 1.72. Now, I was looking into Wix's earnings call, and it actually just came out yesterday, and it's being published today, so there wasn't a transcript for me to read through, and I didn't have time to listen to the call itself, but there was a few key takeaways that are worth noting. Now, the first thing is a lot of the numbers we should be expecting to see increasing did increase significantly. Things like revenue growth, customers being added to the platform, paying subscribers, and really all that good stuff. But I think that's expected, because if we were to see a decrease right now, that would be something absolutely that I would take as a red flag, because Wix is one of those businesses that in theory should have benefited through the coronavirus lockdown, because a lot of people, when you either lose your job or you spend more time at home and want to create like a blog or an online store, that's obviously one of those sites that people turn to. So seeing the revenues increase was expected, but it wasn't that exciting. I mean, the numbers were great, but I think that is really just a tailwind of the coronavirus itself. So that's something that I want to watch moving forward is, will they be able to meet their expectations of revenue growth? And will they be able to continue growing at such a rapid rate that they were able to do in 2020? Now, one thing I did see from their call, though, that was pretty interesting is that they are adding about 3 million customers every month to their platform. Now, that's a great thing to see, but it's also worth noting that that's not 100% paid customers. So that is a mix of the free subscribers and the paid users. And they didn't break it down to how many paid subscribers are added to the platform each month. So that'd be something else I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into to see how many people sign up for this platform, continue using it over an extended period of time, and actually sign up for the paid service. And another thing that really stood out to me is their expenses also dramatically increased during 2020 compared to 2019, like a significant amount. Just to put the numbers relative and just so it's easy to follow along with, in 2019, their expenses were just shy of around $900 million. In 2020, their expenses were around $1.6 billion, meaning they almost doubled the amount of expenses they had, and they didn't break it down fully into where those costs are coming from. And I'd be curious to see if a lot of those expenses are maybe going to advertising to help drive people to their business, since Wix isn't as commonly talked about as companies like Shopify or Squarespace. But for a company that's now been around for 21 years, to have to pay that much in advertising, if that's what that cost went to, is not necessarily the best thing for me to see. And also, another thing that just came out is Amazon just acquired the company, I believe it's called Sells, which is essentially their approach to competing with Shopify. Now, as I said before, I believe that this space obviously has room for more than just Shopify and Squarespace in there, but it is starting to become a little saturated of a market because Square, the payment system, is also getting into this space. We have Wix, we have the gold standard of WordPress, and there's many other people that are starting to get into this arena. Now, that said, when Amazon decides to dip their toes in the water of a new industry, obviously it's a very well calculated approach. So I think when seeing Amazon going into this industry could be actually a good sign, as this might be the potential future of selling items or having an online site with these more drag and drop no coding websites. So that could actually be a good opportunity for Wix. But again, it adds another player out there, which could hurt the amount of subscribers that Wix ends up receiving. Now, I know it kind of sounds like I'm not really that into Wix, and admittedly, I'm a little disappointed with these numbers and these results because it's a company I wanted to be excited for like I am with Shopify, but admittedly, I'm not as excited. Now, I will say I am going to go ahead and add it to the portfolio. I actually haven't done that yet because I wanted to make sure I did all my research, but there's a few key things that I'll be looking out for as this earnings call comes out and as we move forward. First one is those expenses absolutely have to decrease because that is just an absurd amount to be spending, again, for a company that's been around for 21 years and doesn't have earnings yet. The other thing is I really want to see how many people sign up for their platform and stay there. So what is their retention rate with customers? And how many people will sign up and decide to go with the paid features instead of sticking with the free plan? And lastly, if they are not profitable of a company in the next 3 to 5 years, then something is obviously going wrong with this company, and that might be something worth getting out of if you own this position, because 25 years to turn a profit is an extensively long time. I think even Amazon turned a profit quicker than that. I want to say it took them like 14 years, even Palantir at 17 years or something like that. So 21 years right now is not an excuse to not be profitable. But again, I really like this platform. I like the platform of where you can set up your own business, because any business that allows for you to create a business, to me, is a good investment opportunity because of the way that those will generate revenue, given how successful the entrepreneur should be starting that business, if that makes sense. Also, with them having these new apps, so as I mentioned earlier, like Google Ads or MailChimp, that is going to be another source of recurring revenue. So if Wix can establish themselves as maybe like the place for businesses to go to establish an online presence, as opposed to Shopify, if you're not really thinking about selling anything, then I think that Wix has a huge advantage. But this is something that we're just going to have to watch play out. So that said, remember, this is watch list Wednesday, not buy list Wednesday. So this is a company I'm going to watch, but I'm not necessarily going to buy right away, because I just have too many questions that need to be answered ahead of time. So let me add this to the portfolio, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so I did go ahead and add 25 shares of Wix to the portfolio. Not necessarily a large investment, but given their share price, it gives us around the same of market value exposure compared to some of the other investments. Now, again, this is one I'm actually being more cautious with than I typically am with these stocks, because there's a lot more red flags to me than positive signs. But there's enough positive signs, or what there is stands out to me enough, to where this still has a good opportunity in the future. If you look at analyst price targets, they are very optimistic about Wix. So why not take that into consideration as well? Because if this company does have the exposure or starts to really compete with Shopify, then this is one of those companies that the share price could grow significantly. As I said in the past, I actually owned Shopify at around $200 a share, thinking that was expensive. And I sold it at around $500 a share, thinking that was the peak of it. But look at it now. It's almost at $1,500 a share. So this could be a similar story with Wix, but I'm not as optimistic about that outcome as I was with Shopify. So take all that with a grain of salt. As we could see, it's not really off to a strong start at negative $8 a share or gain, but whatever. CVS is down for us. That's crazy to see. And it looks like I really haven't been adding the best stocks to this portfolio recently, because a lot of the recent ones aren't necessarily performing the best. But it is what it is. Portfolio's taking a little bit of a hit, as the rest of the stock market does, so that's what we should expect here. So overall, relatively short video today, and a little bit different because first off, this isn't like a trendy stock, so it's not one that I'm doing this to get a lot of views. And it's also one that I'm not necessarily 100% about, but I'm around 80% on this one. So we'll just have to see how this one plays out, and it's going to be very interesting to watch. But overall, I'm going to wrap up here, so I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you have any questions for me on Wix, or if you want to give me any feedback, please leave that in the comments below. I would greatly appreciate that. Also, bear in mind, if you like this video, it's a 5-cent donation, and if you subscribe, it's also a 10-cent donation. But with all that said, I'm going to wrap up here, so thank you so much for taking the time ahead of your day to watch this video. You could be anywhere in the world, and you're right here with me, and I really appreciate that. But I'll let you go ahead, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.